Good afternoon and welcome to our bpm'online user group. My name is Denise Ponarelli. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Technology Advisors. So today we're going to be talking about using business rules with fields. Specifically, Megan and Chris are going to touch on, how do you show the fields? How do you hide the fields? How do you make those fields dependently required? Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please go ahead and chat them to us at any time. And as always, I will send a follow-up email within the next day or two that will have the link to this presentation, the recording, and in addition to that, I will both chat you the registration link for our next user group and include it in the follow-up email. So, as mentioned, our hosts today are Megan Sheehan, our trainer and business analyst, and Chris Heyman, our software engineer and business analyst. So I'm going to hand the floor over to them to get us started.
So as Denise mentioned, today we're going to go through the process of adding business rules in bpm'online. We will explain the basics of business rules and then go through a number of different types of business rules, walking you through examples of adding each of them to bpm'online. Once we finish getting through adding business rules, we'll give you an update on recent changes to bpm'online, as well as what is coming up in the future. We will also let you know when our next user group is scheduled for, and then open up for Q&A. So as the slide mentions, business rules allow you to configure the behavior of fields on a page. This includes both out-of-box fields as well as any custom fields you add to bpm'online. There are 4 types of business rules that can be configured in bpm'online, and those are showing or hiding fields, locking or unlocking of fields for editing, making fields optional or required, and filtering lookup fields depending on the values in another field. Special note, business rules are client-side logic only and do not apply when importing data or updating data via the API. So these rules only apply when a user is interacting with a record directly. So you can create and edit business rules from within the section wizard or detail wizard, depending on where you want to create the rules. You must be in the page configuration view of the section wizard to view and edit business rules. For most types of business rules, you will set up conditions and actions. The action will apply when the condition is true. Most conditions will reference other fields, but do note that you can also reference system variables such as the current user when creating conditions. So the first type of business rules that we're going to look at is the showing or hiding of fields. Fields are shown by default. However, you can use business rules to only show a field when certain conditions are true. Your if condition should be for when you want the field to actually be shown. Your then action should be show fields on page and select the field you want to be shown. So we'll show you an example of this right now. So we're going to click on View and open the section wizard.
And because we're going in from the page view, we're already going to be in the page section or page view within the section wizard. If you had just gone into section wizard, say from the list view, you would need to click into the page section first. That was something that really threw me off the first couple times I tried to use business rules.
And from here, we're going to click business rules at the top. And then we're going to click add business rule. And then click add condition under if. And we're going to add the field customer.
Field type, right?
Yes, field type, sorry. And then we're going to click down to field. Sorry. And then customer. And then we're going to click Add Action and Show Field on Page. And for the field, we're going to make it customer number.
And customer number is just a custom field we added for this demonstration, so we've already added that through the page designer.
So essentially what this is going to do is only display the customer number when the type is set to customer, when the account type is set to customer. So if the account type is any other type, then customer number field will be hidden. So then we just have to back out of this. You click Section Wizard at the top.
In the interest of time, we've actually pre-saved this so that you guys don't have to watch us sit here and see the pages spinning. So I'm going to just pull up another system where we did the exact same thing. And so you can see here, this record has the type of customer and the customer number field is showing. But if I change to any other type, then that field is no longer shown. Anything else you want to add about that one, Chris?
Nope.
All right. So that's the first type of business rule that you can configure through the Business Rules Builder. The second one is conditionally requiring fields. So this one lets you change whether or not a field is required based on the situation. So based on probably the value of another field, or again, other system parameters like current user. So by default, if you're not using business rules, fields are either always required or always optional. And this allows you to take a field that's usually optional and make it required only when the situation warrants that. When you're using a conditionally required field business rule, your if condition will be when you want the field to be required, and your then action will say to make the field required and select the field. So again, we'll bring up BPM Online and show you this. We're already in the section wizard here, but you would get here the same way if you were starting from scratch. And we'll just go ahead and add another business rule. My condition here is actually going to be the exact same as last time. We're going to make that customer number field conditionally required when the type is customer. So my field is going to be the type field again, and we're going to do this when the type value is equal to customer. And this time our action is going to be make field required, and we will pick, again, the customer number field here as the one to be required. And we would go ahead and apply that, and then we'd back out and save to apply that change. We'll jump over to the one where we've already got that saved for you. So here again, when my type is not customer, I can save without having that customer number field filled in. Luckily, because it's hidden, that would not be great if it was required when it was not hidden. And then if I change it to customer, not only does it display from the first business rule, it now has the asterisk next to it saying it's required, and it won't let me save without filling in a value for customer number.
So for the next type of business rule, we're going to look at locking and unlocking of fields. You can use business rules to change whether or not a field is locked for editing when certain conditions are true. Your if conditions should be for when you want the field to actually be editable. Your then action should be make field editable and select the field you want to be editable/unlocked. So we're going to use the same condition here. And then we're going to say make field editable, and we're going to select the name field.
And Chris, I just realized I think I did this backwards. I'm handling the clicking for Chris here. We actually want this to be not equals, right?
Oh, right.
This is the one that threw me off again here when I first started playing with these. You're defining when the field is editable, not when it's locked. So we want the name to be locked when the account type is customer. If it's not a customer, we want the name to be editable. So we're going to say it's not equal to customer and then make the name field editable.
I think, as we can see, it's currently locked. And if we change the type, now you can edit name.
All right, so all of those 3 examples are all pretty quick and easy to add and remarkably powerful for how easy they are. The last one is also powerful, but going to take a little bit more work. So the last type of business rule is when you want to do filtering on a lookup list. So you've got 2 fields involved in this scenario, which I'm calling field B and field A here on the slide. So field B is like the child field. That's the one that I'm going to change the values of depending on what field A is. So if field A is 1, give me the options A and B for field B. If field A is 2, give me the options D and F. In order to do this, there's a few steps involved. And the first step is you actually have to create a field within the lookup editor for field B, where you can set which value for field A you want that value to correspond with. So we're going to do that with the advanced settings configuration. You would either edit a custom lookup if that custom lookup would already be listed in your customizations. If it's a standard lookup, you need to add it to your customizations by creating a replacing object. So we're going to go ahead and go that route because it's slightly more complicated. And then after we have that done, we'll go into the lookup editor and we'll set up those values. And then finally, we'll go to the business rules editor and set up the conditions or set up the business rule. And what we'll do on this one is there's no conditions on this, so we're going to leave the if section blank, and we'll just have a then section where we add a filter for field values. All right, so this one's going to take us a little bit more time. We'll actually have to do some saving this time, so you'll have to wait for some loading a little bit. Whoops, wrong window. In fact, we're probably going to have to wait for this one. I should have thought ahead and made this one save first. While this is loading, I think Denise said there was a question about one of the previous examples, so this would maybe be a good time to tackle that while we're waiting for the screen to load here.
Sure. The question was, what if you want to lock it for all by one type of person?
So that's where having those system parameters available for filtering conditions would come into play. So you would use instead of having your if condition be a field value, your if condition could be something about who the current user is. And so you would set up, maybe it's a list of all users that you don't want to edit it, or a list of users you do want to edit it, and kind of play around with that a little bit to see exactly how to set that up. Nice timing. All right, so the first thing we're going to do here again, and actually let me first explain what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do is going to be an example in the contact section. And what I'm going to do is use the language field and the title field. So we've got this set up so that there are 2 options for language, United States English or Mexican Spanish. And so depending on what language is picked, we're going to change the options in the title field. So if it's Spanish, we want to have the options, let's say señor and señora, something like that. So the first place I'm going to go is into my advanced settings. And this is where I'm going to do that initial step of adding a field in the title lookup where I can track which language to use that title for. So when this comes up here, I'm going to go into configuration and add that replacing object for the title lookup into my custom package.
Man, I don't know why this internet's being so slow today.
There we go. Okay. So we can go ahead and add, again, let me actually back up before I click that. If I was using a custom lookup for this, that custom lookup would already be here in my custom package, and I could just edit it and do the same thing that I'm going to do here, only I have to do a tiny bit more work this time, and that's why I chose to demonstrate it this way, which is I have to first create the replacing object to say that I want to modify this basic system function that's already there, which is that initial lookup. So the first thing I'll have to do here is set up the object, the replacing object, by telling it what I want to call it and what I'm replacing. So this is going to be called title, and I'm going to be replacing the, what was this called? I think it was called contact something. Contact title lookup. And we'll make sure that that's what I want to use. Yes, that's what I want to use. Thank you. And then once it's picked up that change, I can then go ahead, switch back and forth once here. There we go. I can now add a new field to this lookup table. This is, by the way, pretty much the same way you'd add fields to any object. For a lot of fields, you can just add them through the page designer, but if you ever want to go into the back end and do it or have more field types, this is how you do it. And this field is going to be the language. And we'll call it user language. And we're going to just point to the language object or lookup to get the list of languages. And for ease of setting this up, I will show that as a list. So we're going to have to save and publish this change. Again, it's going to take a minute of waiting. And then once this loads, we can go into our contact title lookup, and we can see the new fields that we've just added there. I just want to copy a value, but I guess I'm not going to get that lucky. Those everywhere. Any other questions while we're waiting for this, Deneen? No?
You got them, shout them out. Loading is taking forever.
It takes a while to deploy changes. That's why we tried to minimize this by having a lot of them preset so that we didn't have to do as much of the waiting as we might have otherwise had to do.
Appreciated. I can't look away now. I'm mesmerized by this little box going around.
Ah, success. All right, so we can go ahead and close out of this and come back over to our designer, and we're going to go to the salutations or title lookup. And the change that we just made here is we've added this field, this language field, to this lookup. So now we have the option to tie these values in that field to a particular language. And so first I'll go through and just tie these existing values to English. And then I'll add a couple of additional values and tie those to English as well. And in case you're curious, because this took Chris and I a while to figure out, The list in the back end is longer than the list in the front end for languages because there's a setting for whether or not languages are active. That way your users aren't seeing a whole bunch of languages they don't need when they're setting up the preferred languages. So that's why I have more options here than I had when I was editing the contact. All right, so now I've got my lookup options set up, and each of them is tied to the appropriate language setting. And so now I'm ready to set up my business rule. So I'm going to go back to the contact section, go into the page so I can get to the page designer. And once this comes up, I'll go into the business rules tab here. So again, for this business rule, I won't have anything filled out in the if section because there are no conditions for when this applies. It always applies. I'll just have the then section filled out. Telling us that I want to do some lookup filtering. So I'm going to use the add field values filter. Again, one note here, because again, something that confused me when I first learned this. If you have an if condition filled out, this option disappears because again, it doesn't work conditionally like that. It's a different type of business rule. So this value is only available if your if condition is blank. So then we will add a filter for field values. It prompts us to do the next step here, which is we need to pick not only which field to filter, but also which connection in this field lookup to use for filtering. In other words, which field in the lookup contains the data that we're going to filter on. In this case, it's the language column. So when we come in here, we're going to connect to that, what's it called? It's just called title? Yes, it was just called title here. We're going to connect to that title object or lookup, and then this is going to be a list of all of the fields in that title lookup, and so we want to filter on this language field that we created. Then it's going to ask us which field on the contact record has that data, and so it's going to be the preferred language field on the contact record that we'll be looking at to see, what the language is for that contact. So here again, we would apply this, we would back up and save that change. Before I show you this one, I'm also going to show you one more advanced setting you can do related to this. And we'll go ahead and include a link to an article about how to do this when we send out the follow-up email for this event. Because I'm actually going to go into the page source code a little bit here, and I'm going to add a couple of advanced properties to this business rule called auto-complete and auto-clean. Autocomplete actually isn't going to do us a whole lot of good with the way we've got the list set up right now. Autocomplete means that if I only had one option for the particular language that I picked, it would automatically fill that in for me. So rather than making me click into the field and pick the only option that's there, just autocomplete it for me. Autoclean is going to allow me to not have to remove a value that's no longer relevant. So if the language changes or gets removed from a contact, automatically remove the value from the title field so I don't wind up with an old value there that no longer really applies because my language has changed. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that into the list of properties here. It doesn't really matter where in the list they go. So I'm just going to come up here and add in auto-complete. Has to be true, meaning I want to use that function, and I also want auto clean to be true. And again, I would go ahead and back out, save those changes, and we'll see the results of that here without the wait this time over here in the contact section. So when I go ahead and fill in a preferred language, because of the autocomplete, it removed, the auto-clean, it removed the existing title because Mr. isn't an option once Spanish is picked. And when I look in the list here, I'm only going to get the options that are connected to that Spanish language. If I switch it back to English, again, we'll see it clear out that value because of the auto-clean, and then I'll see just the English language options or English language values there for the contact. So again, this one's a little bit more work to set up, quite a few more steps involved versus those first 3 examples of business rules we looked at. But those are the 4 categories of business rules that you can set up. You know, no coding or anything other than, I guess, that little bit with the autocomplete and auto-clean to, you know, make your screens change, make some of your requirements change based off of field values within the system. And that's going to wrap up our content on business rules. So if you have any other questions about that, feel free to shoot those our way. Like Chris said at the beginning, we are going to talk a little bit about new releases. So we're going to go ahead and cover the 2 new releases that have come out since the last user group that we did. The first of those was the 7.14.3 release in August. A couple of the bigger features that were included in that release. There were some core updates that included duplicate merge improvements and fixes. So that included the ability to see images when you're doing the duplicate merging. So you can see if you've got contact pictures or account logos or things like that, you can see what those images are as part of the merging. We also saw optimized calendar performance. So if you've got a calendar with lots and lots of activities, they did some fixes to make that display better, as well as the ability to add a preview column in the emails details. So if you've got like the account section open and you're in the history tab where you've got all of those different details showing different history, you can now add a preview in the emails section or detail so that you can see the first 250 characters of that preview without having to, of that email without having to click in. A couple of enhancements to the mobile app that were included in that release. You've probably noticed this if you use the mobile app, especially if you've had to log out and log back in anytime recently. The sync happens much faster than it used to. So there's still a little bit of a wait, but not as long as it used to be. And there are also improvements to time zone handling for dashboards with time filters. So if you've got dashboards that filtered by day, week, or month, they now look at the user's time zone and take that into effect or into account accurately. And then finally in that release, the ability to give different levels of access rights to business processes. So if you want some users to have limited access rights around running business processes, you have the ability to configure that now as part of the access rights setup. And then earlier this month, we had another release, the 7.14.4 release. A couple of things in that one. Some core changes. There were some improvements to the Excel import, specifically the ability to cancel an import in process and stop processing it while it's in the middle of processing that import, as well as automatically resuming the import if it stopped due to various back-end type changes that could have happened, just automatically resuming that. You also have the ability to put the Remind Owner checkbox on the activity mini pages. On the mobile app, this is another pretty significant change here. You can now open links that are BPM record links that will go directly to that app in your mobile app on your mobile device. So if you've got an email or something like that on your phone where you've got a link to a record in bpm'online, it will open directly to the correct record in the mobile app. As well as the ability to work with summary columns and subordinate folders better. There are also some changes on the admin and development side. If you're using the View Changelog option, they've added the ability to get to that data directly from a record edit page. That one is typically restricted to administrator users by default. And then you also have the ability to create details with multiple values in a separate junction table. So essentially what this means is basically a more advanced version of what we did with our lookup today, where you can have a many-to-many connection between those records. So one place this is used off the shelf that you might be familiar with is activity categories and activity results. So as you might know, you get different options for activity results based on which activity category the particular activity is set to. They've changed how that's managed in the administrator tools to make that easier to navigate. And so it now uses this new functionality, but the functionality is available in other places to use as needed.
All right, so our next user group, I've chatted the link to that, but as I mentioned, I'll also add that in the follow-up email, as well as the link that Megan mentioned earlier. But that's going to be happening in early November, and we're going to be talking about dealing with duplicates and how you can use rules to work with those duplicates. So if there's any other further questions about what we're talking about today, toss them over the wall. If not, you can always contact us at any time, and we're happy to help you out. So I'd like to thank Megan and Chris for putting this together today, and we'll see you all in November.